I have little respect, me personally, for those who blindly follow the system, which is purely driven by profit. I
Purely.
mean, so much of The Matrix comes to mind, like that film, The Matrix.
Oh, it's a great film.
It is, and so much of it comes to mind. Like there's this beautiful scene where he's trying to explain to him the way the Matrix works, and saying, "What do you look around you? What do you see? Doctors and lawyers and policemen, like the hearts and the minds of the very people we're trying to free." But until they're free, until they've learned to sort of think outside of this system, they're dependent on the system. They'll fight to protect it. And unfortunately, so much of our leaders have become part of the system. And we should be, as Muslims, leading the way, not following, by the way. This is where a lot of really where spiritual development takes place. It's important for us to have a foot in both worlds.
Is the path of renouncing the world a valid path for some? There is a hadith where the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that there will come a time when the best possession of a man will be a lamb, I believe, who he takes to the mountaintop and leaves the people because of the fitan, because of the tribulations.
Personally, I believe we're practically in that time now. I became so passionate about faith and religion and spirituality. As soon as I graduated, I fled, I ran.
It was an effort to sort of, again, get independence so that you could move in Islamic circles and so that you didn't have to have so much fitna.
Step by step, he's inching us towards a world in which we truly are enslaved to the world itself, and in which we've actually become machines and robbed of our purpose. That's why Jesus alayhi salam said, "What shall it profit of a man if he to gain the entire world and yet lose his very soul?" And so Allah says in the Quran, when you are grateful, I will increase you. Allah's power. This is how Jesus alayhi salam was, for example, able to perform many miracles. But when we turn towards God, the world seems to chase the servants of the Creator. But something is fundamentally different now that has never existed on the world before, and that is technology. We're reaching a point where we're going to require divine intervention just to prevent the annihilation, the extinction of the human race.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Javier with The Real Javier Novoa, and I'm delighted to have again as our guest, Brother Ihsan Alexander, who is a student and a conveyor of the spiritual aspects of Islam. He's also a business and success coach. Islam, of course, spirituality in general is not one-sided. It's not only for the interior. It's also meant to influence the exterior. And Ihsan Alexander knows a lot about that. So Ihsan, I want to thank you once again for joining us here at this virtual table.
Pleasure to be with you again, Javier. Good to see you again.
I remember one of the first videos I saw of you, and I talked about the spiritual one last time we had the interview, was that you were talking about, I believe it was, how the more belief you have in something, the less effort you have to take. And it was like a purely business or success oriented talk. In fact, I didn't even know you were a Muslim. You were wearing a black shirt. You looked sort of like Steve Jobs. And I said, this guy's very dynamic. And I think you got into my feed because I was concurrently watching videos about business and productivity. How did you get into this other aspect of well, it's all related, of course, but how did you get into this success coaching and this aspect of talking about business and productivity and other things? How's that relate to your spiritual journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've always been very interested and passionate about personal development. And it was very attractive to me on my own journey as well, because, not only do we have our faith and spiritual dimension of our lives, but we also have the very real practical dimension of our lives that has to be dealt with. And I remember very early on reading in the Quran a verse in which Allah says, right, regarding the people of reflection, the people of contemplation, the people of wisdom, they're looking at the creation of Allah and saying, "Oh Allah, surely you haven't created this for nothing." Now, I've seen some unhealthy approaches to religion, which is an outright and absolute rejection of everything that has to do with the worldly plane. And that's not really viable or sustainable for most human beings, especially once you have responsibilities. And we're meant to have responsibilities as human beings. We're meant to be fathers and mothers, to have children, to get married, to work in the world. This is all part of life. And in fact, this is where a lot of really where spiritual development takes place. So it's important for us to have a foot in both worlds, in the world of the world and also in the world of the hereafter, the physical and the spiritual worlds. And we should do everything with excellence. This is also one of the principles in the methodology, the ways of the Prophet of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
The
To try.
ihsan, and just parenthetically, by the way, sort of touching on our last conversation, is the path of renouncing the world a valid path for some? Because you see people like Al-Hasan al-Basri, who people say was probably the first Sufi. You see people like Imam al-Nawawi, who never got married, who, rahimahullah, who lived in a small room. Is that a viable path for some, or is that a misinterpretation?
So that's not the approach that our teachers have emphasized. Our teachers have tried their best to stay as close to the way of the Prophet as possible. And so oftentimes people will renounce the world or reject the world in an attempt to not succumb to its traps and its temptations. But the higher path is to deal with the world and to cultivate non-attachment in that process. So the saying goes, right, it's easy to be a saint on a mountaintop or a friend of God in a cave. And you can go to a mountaintop, you can go to a cave for a period of time, but we always have to come back to the world. We always have to come back to reality. So this is why, for example, Shaykh Abdul Khaliq Diwani, one of the early masters of our lineage, said you should keep your hands busy with your work, but keep your heart busy with the divine.
And a hadith is recalled to mind, and perhaps you remember this hadith. I don't remember the exact wording. I think the Prophet ﷺ said, or a companion, that if you cannot put up with the people, go to a mountaintop. But if you can put up with the people, it's better that you stay with the people.
Yeah, I don't recall exactly, so I couldn't say, but that's a beautiful saying. And I would say it's very true. MashaAllah.
Now, parenthetically, again, we're touching on, because we were talking sort of about eschatology, and you did do a beautiful video on the Dajjal, who's the Antichrist. There is a hadith where the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that there will come a time when the best possession of a man will be a lamb, I believe, who he takes to the mountaintop and leaves the people because of the fitan, because of the tribulations. This is a sahih hadith. Do you believe that we're coming into a time like that, or there will be a time where we will have to think about this?
Personally, I believe we're practically in that time now. I mean, who knows? It could get even worse, but I see that time now, and I've been looking for a mountain to seclude myself into, but haven't quite found it yet either. Yeah.
So, but still, the conversation is valid, because even on the mountaintop, you'll have to do work with excellence. You'll have to store food with ihsan. So all of this is still valid.
And even on a mountaintop now, there will be cell phone signals and all of that too. So I don't know if there's any escape from it in this world. And perhaps there's a spiritual metaphorical meaning to that statement as well. So the mountains, represent also the friends of God, because they are pillars, they're anchors of faith and belief in the world. So perhaps a more esoteric interpretation of that hadith might mean to attach yourself to people of faith, to mountains of God, or real awliya Allah.
I remember in one of your videos on meditation, you said become independent, which is dependent within.
Right.
Which means you have to go within and sort of detach yourself from the outer, while, like the Sheikh said, keeping your hands busy with the outer. But so, Ihsan, what's your day job, if we may ask? Because we want to know, like, what's your worldly occupation is, and that sort of ties into all this as well.
Yeah, so now I'm full-time devoting myself to content and to coaching.
MashaAllah, that's great.
Yeah.
So you have your own business in that.
Yeah, so through my website, I do courses, I do one-on-one coaching. We have a group coaching program, as well as the content that I create to reach people.
And what's the main website again, for those who might want to know?
Sure, borderpoint.com.
Borderpoint.com, yes. Were you an engineer before? Because your videos were so well produced, even like 10, 15 years ago.
Early on, yeah. I actually, in my undergraduate studies, I did begin with computer science and engineering as the focus. But after graduating from university, I never actually worked in that field, except for very briefly in the technical industry. But for the most part, because once I became so passionate about faith and religion and spirituality, as soon as I graduated, I fled, I ran. And I tried to keep company with, classical teachers and sheikhs of spirituality. So I spent a lot of time in that pursuit, and then eventually came back and did a little bit of work in the technical industry, technical field, but I was looking for a way to marry passion with the emerging technologies, right, with the internet. And so that's where I began kind of creating content very early on. I think the Islamic meditation program was the first Islamic e-course I think ever made, probably. Right, this is back in 2010, before I think it was on anybody's radar in terms of creating like digital courses.
So you were sort of a pioneer, mashallah, in that aspect. And it was an effort to sort of again get independence so that you could move in Islamic circles and so that you didn't have to have so much fitna.
From an early age, I think I needed to find a way of working that I believed in. And I had a very hard time sort of just working in the normal industries and the normal corporate sector. Because for me personally, my soul had a very hard time in those environments.
As do a lot of us. And that's why on our channel we talk about trying to live free, basically do what you
Yeah,
did. Free
yeah,
meaning free from the corporate strangleholds.
yeah, yeah. And it's important actually because all of this is part of a system. And it's a system that is serving the world. And by the world, I mean a world that is not necessarily in the best interest of the average human being to align us with our purpose and with meaning. We've got to find a way to, I think, bring meaning. So I've learned since then also, right, that there's many dimensions to this, but meaning is very important for us in our lives. Otherwise, we will not be fulfilled as human beings.
So do you say a system? Do you believe that there is a system, a deliberate sort of shaitanic system that is trying to keep people trapped so they cannot see the spiritual aspect? Sort of
Well,
Dajjal system?
absolutely. I mean, the Quran validates this. The Quran verifies this. We've been taught this from the early spiritual scriptures, that there is an enemy in the unseen, Satan, Shaitan, who is engineering and trying to create a world that robs us of purpose. That's his goal, and from the unseen. So to what degree people are conscious or not conscious of that, I think overall the general direction that the world is going in lends itself towards that end. Because unless we're guided by faith, we will be guided by, human beings. Allah says in the Quran that Satan whispers into our hearts. So unless we're constantly tuning our hearts towards God, Satan is going to whisper into the hearts of human beings. And a lot of, I think, what the direction that the world is going in is a direct result of that. Step by step, he's inching us towards a world in which we truly are enslaved to the world itself, and in which we've actually become machines and robbed of our purpose.
In the context of like work and effort, because a lot of people have questions about this, especially in the spiritual community and law of attraction community, when the Prophet said, "Innamal a'malu binniyat," and we talk about action and intention. You talk about purpose, and in the business world, the purpose is to make a profit, right? Of course, the purpose, what to do with that profit, it should be towards sustaining our families and spiritual ends. But you see that a lot of the companions of the Prophet were very wealthy men. If you look at Abdurrahman bin Auf, if you look at Uthman alayhi salam, and even the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who was a merchant and a wealthy person, to what extent is it a valid purpose to pursue wealth within an Islamic framework?
I think we should pursue purpose, and profit should be a byproduct of that. So if we're offering, right, you understand when it comes to business and success, really our worth or our ability to attract wealth is based on the value that we bring to the world. So the value that we possess, the value that we're able to share with the world is what ends up determining, let's say, the profit that we might attract to ourselves. But if profit is our primary focus, we will lose our purpose. That's doing things backwards. That's why Jesus alayhi salam said, what shall it profit of the man if we to gain the entire world and yet lose his very soul?
Exactly.
We have to hold on to our soul in the pursuit of purpose, and profit should be a byproduct of that. When we do that, when we bring value to the world with excellence. So you can do anything. You can be an engineer, you can be a businessman, you can be a creator, you can be a writer, anything you do. But we should never lose sight of why we're doing it. And that why must be purpose first and foremost. Profit should be secondary. Otherwise, we may gain profit, but it'll come at the expense of our souls.
It's always been one idea of mine that Muslims should try to be forefront in business and success so that then we can counteract this sort of dunya system that you're talking about. I don't know if you know Omar Weston's a good friend of mine, is the imam in Mexico, and he basically has a hotel and he has restaurants. He's basically trying to build sort of a community down there so that we can live in accordance with Sharia and spiritual aims. Is that sort of like, do you think that would be a good aim for the Muslim community or people of conscience in general to sort of become successful and actually have a drive for that, for the purpose of making our own independent communities and groups and so on?
Well, the Prophet ﷺ said that the strong believer is better than the weak, although there's goodness in both. And so it's actually incumbent on us to try to cultivate strength. And that, of course, involves physical strength, psychological strength, intellectual strength, financial strength. It's incumbent on us because when you lack strength, you're very limited in what you can do, even in your faith, in your religion, in your spirituality. So it's important for us to become financially competent, capable, strong, but never again at the expense of faith and religion and purpose. As long as we keep our priorities properly aligned, it's an important endeavor for the Muslim community. It's actually one of the problems is that we're so disempowered. Like we look at what's happening in the world right now, and we're the most disempowered. We're almost 2 billion in terms of global population, and yet so utterly weak because we become so disempowered on a practical sense, on a practical level. We have to, again, cultivate power because Allah says, you are the best of nations that have been raised for mankind because you enjoin good and you prevent evil. Well, how can you enjoin good and prevent evil if you have no power? If
You have nothing.
you have no ability to do so. And real humility, too, by the way, requires strength because then you have a choice to be humble. Otherwise,
that's a beautiful way to put it. You have no choice. You're not humble.
No, you're just weak, you know. Real humility requires strength, requires power.
So we should seek that strength. So it seems to me from watching your earlier material on these kinds of topics that you have studied like also law of attraction, law of assumption, some of these other philosophies and how they relate to Islam, it would seem to me.
I did. I came across, for example, The Secret in the mid 2000s, and that was kind of an eye-opening moment for me because I saw them taking an aspect of faith and religion, really an important aspect of faith and religion, but it was outside of religion. This is all embedded within faith and within tradition, right? So it's important for us to understand these principles. Really, we're here to understand how the universe works, how Allah willed for it to work, so we can work with it towards whatever purpose He has created us for.
Mirza Yawar Bey, who's a Muslim sheikh and business teacher, he said that anything that's true, that's Islam to a certain aspect. So business principles, Peter Drucker, anything like that that's actually true, you can see that as practical Islam.
Of course. And we must claim it. The Prophet said wisdom is the property of the believer. So take it wherever you find it, because truth is truth. So when you said law of attraction, for example, I remember listening to The Secret when it came out, and I was amazed because of this emphasis, for example, on gratitude. And what is Allah, right? When you're grateful, they were basically saying the more you're grateful, the more you're in a state of joy, the more you will receive and attract. And so Allah says in the Quran, when you are grateful, I will increase you. It's directly out of the Quran. Now, these are true principles that they came upon in however it reached to them, but it's in the religion. And it's important to reclaim the truth. That's why I actually have a course, Mastering the Law of Attraction.
Oh, well, there you go.
Because we have to reclaim knowledge. We have to reclaim the truth. And it's actually very important for us as Muslims to understand this because we've seemed to have lost a degree of personal responsibility when it comes to our understanding of faith and religion. We've taken this extreme where everything is written and only what Allah wills will happen, which is true. Which is true. But we've forgotten this other aspect of it, which is also true, that we are responsible. That's what the Prophet said to the man when he left his camel. And the Prophet said, why haven't you tied him? And the man said, oh, I'm trusting in Allah. Prophet said, trust in Allah and tie your camel. And I just did a video on this too recently, which was, free will versus predestination. Which is it? Which is true? And actually, if we understand it properly, They're both simultaneously true. Absolutely both simultaneously true. You can't have one or the other. You have to have both.
In different dimensions, correct? Different
Right, and it's
dimensions.
different perspectives. It's
Different
this the different perspectives, like general relativity and quantum physics, quantum mechanics. They're both true. It just depends what perspective you're looking at or through.
I remember Sheikh Salman Al-Auda, who was a Saudi scholar. He wrote about the secret, and he wrote a bit. I can't find it. I couldn't find the article, but he wrote a beautiful article about it. And he talked about, there's the hadith when the Sahaba were being persecuted, the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Prophet said, "Be patient, because there will come a time when this matter will be so great that a woman will be able to walk from Yemen to Syria, fearing only Allah." Something
Mhm.
like this. And he had great imagination. He imagined, for example, the conquest of Persia when they were, I believe, digging the ditches. And I believe Salman al-Auda was talking about the power of imagination. And you also touched in your video that I watched years ago how the more belief you have, the less action you need to take. So how can we get it to where we're not taking so much action and we're having things move simply by our imagination? Or is that even an Islamic desire?
So this is where we have to now actually go deeper into spirituality and the power of spirit that we've all been endowed with. Allah breathed into every human being from his spirit. So that means that we have really divine potential within us, the potential to manifest, if we want to use these sort of terms. But it's based on the power of spirit, Allah's power. This is how Jesus alayhi salam was, for example, able to perform many miracles. And of course, the pious throughout and the prophets, all the prophets. Right? But Jesus specifically is noteworthy because he was known as Ruh Allah, the spirit of Allah. Like that attribute of Allah, that quality was very pronounced with Sayyidina Isa, with Jesus alayhi salam. And we have to remember what we were created to be when Allah said, I'm going to establish on the earth a deputy, a vicegerent, my representative. That's not an, my sheikh used to say, that's not an empty title. It's not just like an empty nameplate. When you're a khalifa, and when you are a khalifa, it means you're endowed with authority, with power. And so if we truly know who we are, if we truly come into alignment with our true being, the human being has divine power. But the problem is we're misaligned, and we've put for ourselves and for as a God the world. So we become subservient to the world. If we are truly subservient to Allah, to God, the Creator, absolutely no fear for the world. That's when the power of belief begins to manifest. That's when a servant of Allah, who is created to be at the apex of creation, that's when the universe serves the servant of Allah. If we are serving Allah truly, the universe has been designed and built and created to serve us. But if we lose sight of that and we become servants to the world by chasing the world, we become slaves to the world.
And that's why even the law of attraction, law of assumption teachers talk about, here's the paradox. I don't know if you've read any Neville Goddard or
I
had
think
any
I've seen a little bit from him, very little.
but I believe he has a lot of aspects of Islam. He even talked about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and his great power of vision.
Mm.
And in this sort of law of attraction, law of assumption ethos, the action you take is never for the sake of attaining your end. You're not to lift a finger to attain your end. But what you're supposed to do is do the action without any expectation of the outcome. And that seems to me a definition of ihsan, where we're not taking action to achieve something. But then my question is, what is mujahada or effort? And you're rewarded for that effort. Is it a sense that we're rewarded because of the struggle, but we can also forego the struggle, but then we'll be rewarded by the outcome? How does that all tie together? That's sort of been in my mind.
Well, the essence of the struggle has to be the struggle for truth and for light, and everything else then becomes secondary. I think flows as a byproduct of that. So we may have to struggle and endeavor, like Sheikh Abdul Khalik said, keep your hands busy with your work, be absolute in your endeavor, in your worldly endeavor, but your heart has to be free from the attachment to the world. Because if our heart is attached to the world and we're chasing the world, it will continue to flee from us. But when we turn towards God, the world seems to chase the servants of the Creator, because it was designed to do that. So you can endeavor. I think a lot of the law of attraction, a lot of the New Age stuff can in many ways lead to a lot of misunderstanding or counterproductivity. You can't just sit and manifest things by, I mean, I suppose it's possible, but that's at a very high level. To sit in your room and meditate and manifest things out of thin air. It's just not going to be practical for humanity, for a normal human being.
Like
Unless,
Maryam in the
exactly,
Quran.
exactly. Unless you're of that caliber or of the awliya of Allah, you better deal with, you better be busy, like with work. You got to be in action. And in fact, action is a sign of belief. It's the act of receiving is by being in action. Right? You have to be in action in order to receive, because you believe that it's possible. So it's important to be in action, but also to be non-attached to the results. We render the results back to God. You take action and you leave the results to God. And that's the perfect formula for achievement and attainment. It's the
So
most
we
effective path.
Yes, so we talk about attainment in the world, and you talked about the fact that you tried to leave corporate America as soon as possible because we don't want to compromise our values. However, I remember from a talk of Hamza Yusuf. You're familiar with Hamza Yusuf, and he was talking about the fact that people say, I'm as righteous, as these scholars. He said, what are you talking about? There's a sheikh in Egypt who will not even drink water from the pipes. He said, where's this water coming from? It comes from the pipes. He will not drink it because those pipes were funded by riba. And of course, we have interests everywhere. Where do we draw the line on whether we're going to actually participate when everything is steeped in interest? I think there was a hadith where the Prophet said that there will come a time when you will be covered in the dust of interest, whether you want to or not. So it seems like just living in this age, we're compromising our values constantly. Where do we draw the line there? And how do I know whether my pursuit of success is to the detriment of my iman?
So we have to do the best that we can with what we have from where we're at. For the average person now, if I start worrying about drinking the water from the pipes, like there's a billion things that are probably more pertinent to me to deal with in terms of securing my faith and my sincerity than that level of subtlety at this point. And so that may be the level for that particular sheikh, but that's not going to be the level for the average person. For us, let's just try to avoid maybe eating, extremely haram things, like
Right.
animals that have been tortured their entire life. Like there's so much more immediate things for us to deal with. So you just do the best that you can with where you're at, or from where you're at, with what you've got, and make incremental progress. Right? Incremental progress. There may come a day where you're, at that level of piety and purity. And at that point, you can probably end up, you might be not too far off from walking on water. But we're not there yet.
Definitely not there yet.
I have little respect, me personally, for those who blindly follow the system, which is purely driven by profit.
Purely.
I mean, so much of The Matrix comes to mind, like that film, The Matrix.
Oh, it's a great film.
It is, and so much of it comes to mind. Like there's this beautiful scene where he's trying to explain to him the way the Matrix works, and saying, "What do you look around you? What do you see? Doctors and lawyers and policemen, like the hearts and the minds of the very people we're trying to free." But until they're free, until they've learned to sort of think outside of this system, they're dependent on the system. They'll fight to protect it. And unfortunately, so much of our leaders have become part of the system. And we should be, as Muslims, leading the way, not following, by the way. I think it comes from a profound inferiority complex, that they feel that they just have to prove that they are on board, loyal citizens, on board with the system, with the protocols. They're the most law-abiding citizens. So when the mandate comes down, they want to be the first ones to prove, yeah, we are loyal. I don't know where it comes from. It's some sort of a strange inferiority complex.
It's fear.
It's tragic, actually. It's tragic because they're doing a disservice to the Muslim community and to the world, in fact.
So going back into sort of what we're going into in this world, because it's very fascinating. Do you believe Al-Masih Dajjal is going to be an actual person, or do you think it's a system?
I think personally, I think it's both.
It's both.
And I mentioned that in my video that I think that his system is really fully almost it's manifesting in front of us, the system of deception and inversion. But I think that there will be an individual also that will be the embodiment of that system. This is based on, what we know from traditional knowledge.
Traditional knowledge and hadith. And the Mahdi alayhi salam, do you believe that he's also going to be a leader from the
Yes,
Muslims, an actual leader? And do you think he's
absolutely.
already amongst us?
Many of the awliya, many of our shuyukh have indicated that he is upon the earth, but has yet to unveil himself, maybe is one way to put it, or yet to be unveiled by Allah. But I personally feel that we are most likely in such times now, or very close to them.
So,
And here's what makes it different. We can say that throughout history, there have always been instances where people will think, oh, wow, we're in the last days. Maybe they were in the invasion of the Mongols or the world wars or all kinds of incidences, right? Then people have said, oh, this could be the end times. But something is fundamentally different now that has never existed on the world before, and that is technology.
certainly.
Modern technology, which is changing the game altogether. We've reached a point of no return now. And now with AI on the horizon, actually in place, we're reaching a point where we're going to require divine intervention just to prevent the annihilation, the extinction of the human race.
Do you
It's
think AI is a real thing that's going to attain consciousness, or do you just think it's very sped up to where we can destroy ourselves with it?
The great danger. I don't know. It's hard to say, but yes, there's the great danger that some sort of AI does become self-aware as like the ego itself is just a program, right? The way our brains work, it's a program that's primary drive is self-preservation. Like the sense of self that we have is a program too. That's not different from AI. It's actually is an AI. But the human being has something as well that can battle that, which is the spirit, the
Ruh,
soul
right?
within, the ruh, exactly. So machines don't have that. So once the machine really mimics the human brain and does so in a way that it can learn exponentially faster, but it lacks the spirit to somehow mitigate that, the idea that we can create AI, that we can create an intelligence infinitely greater than ourselves, and somehow we can impose controls on it is, I think, absurd. It's ludicrous. It's like we're going to give birth to something infinitely more intelligent than us, and somehow we're going to be able to control it. It's like the ancient attempt to control the genie, and it's going to lead to our own, self-destruction. But aside from that, technology too, AI now and just technology in general, the amount of damage and harm we can do. Like, look at the COVID pandemic. I think it's pretty much been established at this point that this was a lab leak, that this came out of, attempts to engineer a virus or manipulate a virus. If we're playing with these types of forces now, I mean, it's miraculous that we haven't destroyed ourselves yet. Like the idea that we can control life. I was very young when Jurassic Park came out. Remember Jurassic
Yes,
Park?
me too. Yes,
And they were going to bring the dinosaurs back into the world.
they can
And,
do that now, by the way,
well,
supposedly.
the thing that I remember from that film is, wow, like humanity is getting to a point where we need to be very humble in what we do, because if we unleash forces utterly beyond our control into this world, we will wipe ourselves out, or we will be wiped out. And it's inevitable now with technology, because if one nation doesn't do it, another will. So it's like a race now to almost to annihilation is what it feels like to me. It's getting to the point now with technology that we require divine intervention just to save ourselves from ourselves.
And we have to just have tawakkul that would happen.
Absolutely.
I remember a sheikh was actually saying, and I don't know what the Sufi scholars have said about this, that all of the mentions of like al-malhama and the battles before the end of time, they're done with swords now, and so on. The prophet could have said that there's going to be some kind of a figure that you know that a missile or something like that, but he didn't. It says, and some of the scholars say no, the electric grid is going to be taken out before that time, and we are going to be doing it with swords. Do you believe that's a viable explanation, or do any ulama from the Sufi angle say this?
My shuyukh have indicated that as well.
Subhanallah.
Yeah.
So it's just getting crazy. I mean, so I think the most important takeaway from this conversation is, you know, yes, we're to do everything we're doing with Ihsan. We still need to have purpose and to work, but we've got to get more spiritual really quickly, correct? Because things are going to happen that are going to blow us away.
Yeah, and I think maybe in general, the important point is that we have to be seeking lives of balance.
Indeed.
In everything, right? Even let's say we can look at what's happening, and we don't want to sort of succumb to a sort of a doomsday belief system where like we lose hope in the world, and because that's not part of that's not balanced either. The Prophet ﷺ, for example, said, even if you hear the trumpet being blown for the day of judgment and you're going to plant a tree, finish what you're doing. So, you know, the spiritual path, look, we're not here in this world forever. We're not trying to somehow figure out how to survive the apocalypse and you know, build some sort of bunker for us. Like, who cares?
We're not here forever.
No, we're not. We're not. Let's just live well today in a way that is in alignment and in harmony with Allah's will. And this goes to everything. It goes to the work that we do, to the type of science that we want to support and encourage, everything. It should be in harmony and in alignment with divine will and with nature. Live well today. We don't know if we'll be here tomorrow. Forget about the end of the world and AI taking over. Who knows? I may walk out in the street or I may not wake up tomorrow morning.
Precisely.
But so let's just, you know, the point comes back, and this is the teachings of the prophets. Live here and now. Live well here and now. In fact, most of the mistakes we make is when we don't live for here and now. When we lose touch with the present moment, and it's all about the future and the future. Of course, we're aware of, you know, the future, but we need to learn how to live in a way that is based in faith, where we're not being driven by fear.
Precisely. And when we're completely present, there's no anxiety.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brother Ihsan, thank you so much for a wonderful interview. I think this is a great conversation. Intelligent people who are looking at Islam, what's your last advice to intelligent people who are looking to Islam, who are looking to the spiritual aspects of Islam to perhaps help them live better, to live a better life?
I would say continue being a learner, continue to be a student, seek knowledge, and in humility, God will guide. And seek the pleasure of Allah above all else. Keep reminding ourselves that we're here for a short time. Let us live well and live to the best of our abilities in a way that is pleasing to God. We can't make our own selves our gods. Allah is our Lord. And the best that we can do is to seek to be servants of the divine.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. And one more time, your main website where we can take your courses. I want to look into some of those courses because they seem we get very deep into these topics, correct?
Yeah, that's where we can, you know, approach them almost systematically and methodically and understand them at a deeper level. So the website is borderpoint.com.
Borderpoint.com. So I hope we can have other conversations in the future. It's been wonderful.
Likewise, Javier. Great to connect with you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.